Alright, 6th graders, we're back, and today we're going to be looking at fractions, decimals, and percents. By the end of this lesson, you want to be able to change between fractions, decimals, and percents. So what is a percent exactly? A percent is a ratio of a number to 100. And it is another way to write fractions and decimals. So first thing we're going to look at is what are the fractions and percents modeled by each grid. So each of these is out of 100 just like a percent is out of 100. And just so you remember, percent sign would look like this. So here we have, if we count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that'd be 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this would be 57 out of 100 blocks that are covered, and since a percent is just a ratio of a number out of 100, that's the same as saying that 57% of the blocks are covered. So now you go ahead and pause the video and try the next one on your own. Alright, on this one we have 1, so on this one when we count, we see that there are 3 covered, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 34 out of 100 would be our fraction, and then that as a percent would be 34%. So the question is, which decimal would be bottled by each grid? Well, the nice thing is if you're looking at the fraction where they're out of 100, that's the same as saying 57 hundredths, so this one would be 0.57, and 34 out of 100 would be 34 hundredths, or 0.34. So the big takeaway from this is that fractions, decimals, and percents can all be substituted for one another. We want to write each of the following percents as a decimal. So remember, 43% is the same as saying 43 out of 100, or 43 hundredths, which would be 0.43. 25% would be 25 out of 100, which is the same as saying 0.25. Now, if you notice, in 43%, the decimal point is technically to start with after the 3 and ends up before the 4. Same thing with 25. It's after the 5, technically ends up before the 2 because there are 2 zeros in 100. If we follow that rule, on our next one, see how it's 1.6% and the decimal point's actually in there? We can move our decimal point back 2 spots to use some mental math, and we just fill in a 0 there. So 1.6% is actually the same as 0.016, or in other words, 16 thousandths. Same with 130%. If I have the decimal point after the 0, I'm going to move it 2 spots. Ends up in between the 1 and the 3, so 130% is the same as 1.3, or 1 3/10. So now we want to write each percent as a fraction in simplest form. So 55% would be, every percent is always out of 100, 55 out of 100. Well, each of those is divisible by 5, so we have 11/20. Alright, why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try the next one on your own. So we have 81%, so we get 81 out of 100. Since 9 is the only thing that goes, 9 is the biggest number that goes into 81, and it doesn't go into 100, 81 hundredths is actually our simplified version. 2.7% is a little bit different, so this would be 2.7 out of 100. Well, we can't actually have a decimal point in the fraction. So if we think about changing this into a decimal first, remember we'd move it back 2 spots, which would be 0.027. Well, now if we read that number, it's actually 27 thousandths. So this would actually be 27 over 1,000. 125% would be 125 out of 100. Well, that is an improper fraction. 100 goes into 125 one time with 25 left over, and then 25 out of 100 is a fourth. So this would be the same as saying 1 and 1/4. Now we want to try and write each decimal as a percent. So this would be 2/10. Well, we always want to get it out of 100, so if I multiply this by 10, multiply the top by 10, it becomes 20 out of 100, which would be the same as 20%. This would be 46 hundredths, so 46 out of 100, or 46%. But once again, if you think back to our rule of when we were changing percents to decimals, how we moved our decimal point 2 spaces to the left, we do the same thing here and move our decimal point 2 spaces to the right to make a percent, because there are 2 zeros in 100, so we multiply 100, the decimal point moves 2 spaces to the right. So if we follow that rule here, 3 hundredths would go 1, 2, the decimal point would after the 3, and this would be 3%. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try the next two on your own. On our next one, 0.045, I'm going to move it 1, 2, so our decimal point's actually going to go between the 4 and the 5. So this would be 4.5%. And for the 1.32, I move it over 2 spots, it becomes 132%. Lastly, we want to write each fraction as a percent. Well, the easiest way to do it is if you can get your denominator equal to 100. That's a pretty easy way to do it. So like here, 5 times 20 is equal to 100. So now I would do 4 times 20, which would be 80. So it would be 80 out of 100, which would be 80%. The other way we can do it is actually divide and change our fraction to a decimal. So like here, 3 divided by 4, some of you might know this off the top of your head, but 4 can't go into 3, but it goes into 30 7 times, which would be 28, with 2 left over. Add in another 0. Oops, not a 0 there. 4 goes into 25 times. So we have 0.75, and moving my decimal point over 2 spots. This would be 75%. And you can use calculators for this as well. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try the next two on your own. So if I was going to do 7/40ths, I might go ahead, since 40 doesn't multiply into 100 evenly, I'm just going to go ahead and do 7 divided by 40. I'm going to add that decimal point in, so it doesn't go into 7, but it goes into 71s with 30 left over, so I add in a 0. 40 goes into 300 7 times, which would be 280, leaving us with 20, so I'm going to add another 0. 40 goes into 200 5 times, with none left over. I'm going to move my decimal point over 2 spots, so this would be 17.5%. On this last one, 1 and 1/25, I know that 25 goes into 104 times, so I'm just going to multiply each by 4. So this becomes 1 and 4/100ths, or 1.04. And if I change it to a percent, move it over 2 spots, becomes 104%.